Hey everybody, this is Rydo and we're back to another live stream of Yu-Gi-Oh! Master Duel and video game news. Today is Monday, November 27th, aka Cyber Monday. Starting maybe a little bit later in the evening. I was awake at like 10 o'clock, ready to go, and honestly, I probably could have streamed, but I instead just decided to sleep. It really is getting to the point where that is kind of the standard way my sleep schedules worked, is that yeah, maybe I could push it and be drowsy and give a poor quality performance at 10, or I could go to sleep and then wake up at 6 in the evening. So yeah, maybe I could have done it at 8. I wanted to start early because I knew there wasn't going to be that much news, and I think that has consistently stayed the case. In particular, let me just reload my Twitter, and honestly, I don't think there's going to be more than 10 or 20 new tweets that I even have on my own feed as far as potential video game news. Yeah. Let's see. Yeah, me scrolling on through Twitter. Meanwhile, while I'm doing this, I was surprised when launching Yu-Gi-Oh! In that they have this 20th anniversary for maybe the Yu-Gi-Oh! Card game, which is very confusing because the 25th anniversary for Yu-Gi-Oh! Has been going on, if not since January, definitely for at least 6 months. And I can only really justify this unless this is just them being really late to the party, as a situation where the Yu-Gi-Oh! Manga and the anime I know came fairly quickly after the manga, all came out maybe 6 months or somewhere around there before the actual card game came out. And this may very well be a case where the card game came out in one form factor in Japan, and then it somewhat drastically changed when it came out to the Western version of Yu-Gi-Oh! Which, yeah, there still is that division there where there's Yu-Gi-Oh! CCG versus Yu-Gi-Oh! TCG or something along that lines, where the Japanese version of Yu-Gi-Oh! Had some slight differences. They try very hard, I would say, to not have any differences, but sometimes things just get tested in the Japanese version of the game and just don't really work, and thus they get a second chance when they translate it to English. But you would think that the right move when you have a situation like this is to just have the celebration once and not have two separate situations where, yeah, the whole situation is here, where you're going to have two celebrations and kind of confuse it. Although, in all fairness, it's not a terrible idea to potentially have two separate celebrations for Yu-Gi-Oh! Master Duel, because, you know, Yu-Gi-Oh! Master Duel has been very poor as far as giving away free cards in a game that has 10,000 cards to give away. And Obelisk the Tormentor, as a card to give away, is a very good one to give away because A, it's not really playable, and B, it's very cartoon memorable. That obviously anybody who watched the first Yu-Gi-Oh! Anime series all the way through knows Obelisk the Tormentor and has fond memories of it. Of course, they are doing the thing that I kind of hate in all, particularly digital collectible card games, where they're putting on this visual effect sheen or something similar to this visual effect sheen, which just then kind of makes it more difficult to actually look at the picture if you actually wanted to look at the picture, which there really is no way here to double click on the picture a second time and get just the image, and there's no button here to turn off the sheen. You can click related cards and it will show you just cards that are related to Obelisk the Tormentor, which is really just 4 according to their list, and then you can click here and you can see here in the sheen, with the sheen being removed, it's much easier to see Obelisk the Tormentor. Of course, it really doesn't look anything like the cartoon, and in a game related to an anime cartoon, it would be rather nice to have some kind of YouTube channel that you could click a link to that would show you a clip, or in the app itself show a slight clip of what Obelisk the Tormentor looked like in the cartoon and his attack and things like that. Of course, it'd almost have to be ad supported for Konami to bother to spend some effort on that, but that's really not a terrible idea either. It's just, here's the episode that he shows up in the cartoon, click here to watch the cartoon. I have said in slow moving games like Yu-Gi-Oh! Collectible card game, really would make a lot of sense that you could just pop up a video player in this top right. And same is true for Pokemon card game. If they just integrated a video player in the top right and you're just watching videos while you're playing, I think that would potentially double the entertainment value. So yeah, day one, this is from, I guess, now to January 24th. January 4th. So I guess I'll have to load in every single day. Day 1 was Obelisk the Tormentor. Day 2 is going to be just 500 gems, which is not really that much. Day 3 is what? The one who saves raw pack tickets. And then day 4 is 300 gems, which is even less. And then day 5 is Obelisk the Tormentor icon. Then 1 more pack ticket. I don't know how many cards are actually in these packs. And then day 7 is 200. So it's not really even much of a reward. In fact, I would say they probably spent too much effort in this background art for the screen that you're potentially only going to see 7 times. And this is to celebrate the 25th anniversary of the Yu-Gi-Oh! Card game, not to celebrate the general Yu-Gi-Oh! Experience, or 25th anniversary of Yu-Gi-Oh! In general. And yeah, that popped up when I launched Yu-Gi-Oh! This morning at 10 in the morning, so that's why I'm now having to reboot, because it's sitting on the screen. And I guess it totally just wrapped around, so there, now we have 500 gems. What else do we have new? Let's see. There is a secret pack, the one who saves Ra, which 1 pack, 1 free pool. Before we do that, let's look at the cards. There is a real problem here. We don't have Ra, apparently. Although it feels like I would have had Ra. Like, apparently not. Some of these later... Yeah, I think I have this version of Ra. Some of these later cards, like Ra's Disciple, were attempts to make the God cards more playable. Weirdly, it says I don't even have a copy of this, which I would have sworn I would have had a copy of Lava Golem. But yeah, none of these cards are really that playable. If you had all of these cards, this is basically the deck that you would have seen in the anime series. Maybe you could play it, but it almost comes down to a point where there would have to be a festival that forced you to play it. Yeah. So I have this version of Raw, and I have this version of Raw, but I don't have this version of Raw. But yeah, it definitely highlights a problem too, that this is what they're still talking about, because this really is the first anime series years and years ago that they're building hype around, which is just to admit that the next 4 anime series, or all the other anime series they've made, the sequel series, have just been very, very poorly received. And yeah, you really are selling this card game to people who would be 30 years old or older, because yeah, you're not getting the new audience with reruns of this. Let's see. Yeah, 1 pack is only going to make so much difference. And clearly some of these cards I already have way too many copies of. This opened up this secret pack, which we could consider this, so let's go ahead and consider it. This would have been the secret pack I probably would have leaned into to try and get the God cards. But it is actually a very poor secret pack to continue to purchase cards on, in that you're never really going to have a situation where you're going to be able to play more than one piece of the Forbidden One, Exodia, the Forbidden One. So potentially, if you have more than 3 copies of this, it will dissolve into crafting points. But particularly in the few cards that are limited to always only having 1 copy that you can play in a deck, you are just gonna waste your time crafting more. Yeah, this would be an absolute terrible secret pack to engage with. So yeah, we'll ignore that. Meanwhile, we can purchase this for $50 just to continue to have a complete collection. I kind of wish account selling was more of a thing in most games. I imagine that there are situations here where I could have sold my old Hearthstone account, or some of the other games I've played's accounts, and there probably is some of that, but I wouldn't really know how to go about doing it, and I wouldn't be surprised if it sells for way less than you'd want. Years of playing Hearthstone, selling for $10 isn't really much. So we have this the Sky Dragon bundle, which seems to be several card packs and 1 custom card, and it's a card back. So we're gonna get this one. Really, this is all things that should have just been there from the beginning, is the idea. A playfield. It really should have been day 1. You go through the tutorial. Through going through the tutorial, you're reliving the experience of the anime series, and in reliving the experience of the anime series, you are going to end up with the 3 God cards, which even Yu-Gi-Oh! Didn't really, Yugi in the Yu-Gi-Oh! First anime series didn't really play with for very long. And I don't recall there being a real reason for that. It almost seems like it would have made sense that after that whole God card arc happened, that the god cards would have had to been like magically sealed away and never used. So this is just your Master Duel pack. It feels like 7,000 cards are going to be playable, and there's no featured cards per se. Whatever. That's a massive amount of gems at 2,500 gems to effectively just have you buy Master Duel packs. And you know what? In the interest of saving time, I'm not gonna sit here and open all the packs. We'll just go ahead and skip. Undoubtedly, we are going to get new cards, but undoubtedly, we're also going to open extra secret packs. And so, by buying this and spending 2,500 gems, they are now just going to try and pressure you to spend even more, which that's just not really a tactic that I think is going to work for me. I don't know if that works for most people. I think you're not getting expensive enough and necessary enough in the purchase that you can start to throw on extra add-ons like a car salesman. So yeah, they just really have a terrible thing. If anything, I would say they probably should have an algorithm that says, when's the last time you purchased a card pack? And let's put pressure on people to purchase card packs who haven't purchased card packs in a while. Maybe even on a daily basis, having a daily quest that says your first card pack is discounted every day. So come back every day and we'll give you a random discounted card pack. But yeah, after having spent money, most people don't want to spend more money. So we got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. A lot of new cards here. And to that level, that's pretty common that you would just have one copy of a super rare, an ultra rare still from a master deck, or just new cards in general. Once you start getting into the rares, there's still a decent number of rares that I don't have one copy for. And then once you start getting into the normals, that'll be fairly low, because I've actually spent the extra energy to craft at least one copy of every normal card, or a lot of the normal cards. Clearly not all of them, because I'm still getting some news here. But it inherently doesn't matter. Like, while I do recognize a few of these cards, and I question why there's like 2 stacks here of what look like the exact same card. Statue of Anguish pattern. Statue of Anguish pattern. I guess I just got 2 copies, of which I already have 6 copies. Yeah. Just because these are Master Duel cards, none of these cards are playable, really. They're just the old cards. It's a game that has 10,000 cards in it, and 7,000 of them are too old to really be playable. Although, in all fairness, I do still play this in my Zodiac Tri-Brigade, so that's a very generalized, probably not that accurate statement. And yeah, I recognize Megamorph, but it's not something that you see in the top tier meta decks. So then this just pushes us to potentially look at more of these featured set decks, which this would be a good candidate, but now I have a situation where I don't want to engage with that or any of these others until at least I go over here and engage with this one. Although engaging with this one doesn't make a lot of sense either, because we're going to get card packs from it. So yeah, what I need to figure out is, do I want to engage with this at all? Because you'd have to throw a ton of gems to get the ultra rares and the super rares. It's weird that you can have effectively 3 copies of 3 different versions of Raw in a deck. Yeah, I don't think you would. So I'm just going to say I'm never going to buy the ones who serve Raw as a pack. And then apparently it's time to buy another Duel Pass, which that's always worth it, because if you just play enough, you will get 700 gems back, and it costs 700 gems. Plus you'll get a bunch of crafting points that at some point might actually be useful. Then there's this special bundle that includes 10 master packs and this, which sure, it's cheaper, I think. And that just finds more secret packs. And yeah, more master cards. Even in the general sense, there's just a problem. Do I need 5 additional deck slots? No, not really. But there is just a general problem of giving you 10 packs worth of cards is too many cards to deal with at once. You probably should find a way that after beating one battle, you're given closer to 5 cards after each game you play, and you can just look at the cards there, evaluate the cards in a smaller subset, and decide whether or not you want to add them to your deck. That'd be very nice, frankly, if you could open one pack here after each game and then evaluate the cards and say, hey, do I want this in my deck, or do I want this in a different deck, to integrate deck building in between game plays would be nice. Now that's not how I've seen most collectible card game players play in the real world. They very rarely have I seen an instance where you're in a tournament or you're playing with friends, and then all of a sudden there's a break in between games and people are rebuilding their decks. There's a little bit of that from like a side deck in a tournament, but those are all thoughts and pre-built decks. But I would say the digital version of a card game is probably the practice to any real world tournaments or real world play you would have. So it makes some sense for the practice, even if you are playing ranked play, to play a little bit differently. And it definitely makes sense to try and integrate the idea of deck building way more around gameplay. Inherently, it'd be nice if the game also gave you some kind of reward for playing cards you've never played before, and encouraged you somehow. So there's this other card pack. Let's see what this is. They are also overwhelming considerably here, when you could have staggered these releases over the course of a few days, a few weeks. It's not like Black Friday, Cyber Monday is a great day to add new content to Yu-Gi-Oh! If anything, I'd say it's kind of a bad weekend to add new content, because people tended not to play, from what I could tell, as much games over the weekend, because they're doing Thanksgiving and things like that. It definitely was my experience over the weekend. As far as my own personal accountability section, is that I spent the entire weekend being fairly lackluster and fairly slow, looking at Black Friday, Cyber Monday deals, which Cyber Monday deals are now also happening, at least on Amazon Prime, on Saturday and Sunday too. and really not that many deals to mention. They weren't even that good. So is this a candidate? You've got a whole bunch of ultra rares, and then there's some super rares. Really isn't a good candidate either as far as a secret pack. And this secret pack I think will stay around for a while, so yeah, you have this secret pack is going to stay around for 43 days because of it being new. This secret pack is going to stay around for 43 days. And then all these others are older secret packs that were unlocked from opening all of them. And really none of them are candidates at all because I just don't have enough gems. I had 5,000 gems and it drained me down to about 1,000. If I was to spend 1,000 now and then not get a ultra rare or super rare, then it would just guarantee, the guarantee is that the next pack would give you a super rare and ultra rare, which I couldn't afford. Now the good news here is that very few of these are actually good candidates. This might be a better candidate. Some of these secret packs have higher odds of giving you the cards you want compared to just buying a master pack, where master packs are the absolute worst things you can buy. But this one would be a bad candidate to go with. Yeah. And again, in the interest of time, I just don't see a reason to go through all of these. This is a ton of ones that have been opened. The Duels Cup rewards, if there were any more tickets, have one more day. Legacy pack rewards. How many tickets do I even have? 11. Yep. It's been a while since we've seen a structured deck go on sale. And it's been a while since we've had really good bundle deals. This Ash Blossom bundle deal was the very first one, I believe, and it was perhaps the best one. Although this bundle deal giving you Ash Blossom, this bundle deal giving you Lightning Storm, this one giving you Nibiru, all of those are fairly good cards. I'm not sure if this Triple Tactics Talent Ultra Rare is one you could really play with. Now, so for the 25th anniversary, they've just sold me a bunch of stuff. So, that hardly a celebration in my book, draining my stuff, draining my crystals. The pass resetting after a long while. These passes probably should be much closer to 30 days long, not 71 days, or at least 60 days. Get it down to a round number. 71 is incredibly unround and inconsistent. What I'd want to see from a celebration now is that there would be a whole bunch of missions to give you more rewards, which I'm not really seeing that. Like, we've got daily logins, we've got alive, there's no new discovery missions, there's no new lifetime missions. Yeah. So instead of giving us daily missions on top of the daily login missions, they literally just caused me to spend about 4,000 gems, and they're going to give me 1,000 back if I log in multiple times every day. A gem sale only makes sense if you're going to actually spend money on the game. Yep. Most of these notifications seem to have happened as they released everything, instead of getting a little bit of hype around that. They seem to be going deeper into the idea of alternate art cards, which, yeah, I'm not really that interested in alternate art. We bought that. Duel fields are available for discount, which if I had been able to see into the future, then maybe I would have saved some gems by saving up and buying all those duel fields now instead of when they first came out. Then another mate card as far as Hungry Burger. And then new icon. It all comes off very much as a case of just greediness, though. And this is Konami, so we know Konami is greedy. They've not been terribly greedy in the game, but they definitely have not been great either. We still have this proficiency test too, which I need to fusion summon and synchro summon, which, yeah, that's not really gonna happen. There's kind of no way that I'm gonna be fusion summoning or synchro summoning while playing ranked. At least I'll have to find some other mode I can do that. If we now dismantle all the extra cards we have, it's going to give us exactly 0 crafting points for ultra rares, 10 crafting points for super rares, 445 crafting points for rares, and then 430 crafting points for normals. Which, yeah, it's not really a lot, and I've never really found a good argument to spend the extra effort to try and just craft all of these missing cards. Which, yeah, guess I'd have to filter here too to see, get this, if we wanted just the rarities of normal and super rare, I mean normal and rare, then we can see there's a long list here. Although it's not super long percentage wise. Yeah, you can see that I have at least one copy now of what I would say is probably 80%, roughly 80% of all the normals and rares. So I could fill out the whole process there and craft these. But then your next goal would be fairly lackluster in that you would just be trying to get 3 copies of each of these cards, and then after you have 3 copies of each of these cards with the crafting points, I don't know what you can really do at that point. Like, a lot of these cards, you're going to have multiple copies of them, or you're going to have shiny versions of the cards, and that's just going to add to the idea that you would need more and more copies. And if there are cards that you have been given in certain ways, they can never be crafted. So if we scroll down here, let's see. See if we can find the split point between having 3 copies and 2 copies. Yeah, here we are. You can see that having that 3rd copy still is about 75% of the deck. So I only have about 25% of all the normals and rares have 3 copies. Whereas if I scroll down very far to the bottom here, this is the split point where you have this, I would say about 10% of normals and rares that have 4 or more copies, which is ridiculous. And that's one major problem with this game, is that I should be able to disenchant or destroy the 4th copy of these cards, but I can't because I got the 4th copy or all 4 copies of the cards through purchasing some kind of bundle or something, which is just unnecessary. Although I guess it's not that big of a deal if it is really only about 10% of all the normal and rares, and it really wouldn't give me that much crafting points. Okay, so where are we as far as Yu-Gi-Oh goes? Playing ranked. We're at Platinum 4, so we could either try to play for 100 gems to go up 1 rank after 4 more wins, or we try for some kind of solo thing. I think I'm gonna go with a solo thing today. Normally I don't play solo, but if I can do this, at least play 3 solo games, that would be great. If I can get these solo missions completed, that would be great. For the accountability section, on my smart on-air light, smart on-air sign is the branding. Can't even keep the branding straight in my own head. Like, it did seem to reset randomly. I don't know if this was a power outage or if this was a just bug. It seems like it did it after probably about a week or 2 of running straight, maybe really just a week. But it reset and then just reconnected, so I don't know if I really feel like there's a big deal there. Try to figure out how to do this correctly. I also, on the smart on-air sign, am working on, and I think I, for the most part, got the accuracy done on the instructions. So the second pass of having ChatGPT rewrite it for brevity and reading it and just double checking everything is correct, and a lot of that really comes down to trying to use the least amount of words possible to keep things simplistic. Things like click OK versus click the OK button. A lot of it is definitely around the idea of not saying something if there's no real positive outcome around it, or not just talking in detail or depth if there's no reason to. For instance, the Smart on Air sign has to connect to a 2.4 gigahertz Wi-Fi network. So I'll say connect to a 2.4 gigahertz Wi-Fi network, but I'm not going to bother to explain why a 5 gigahertz or 6 gigahertz network won't work, since there's really nothing to say there. It really should just be a this is it and that's how it is, and that's all I have to say on it, just to keep the instructions easy. And at a certain level, no amount of extra words is going to prevent people with troubles having troubles, and customer support potential requests, and confusing other people with too much information is just going to cause more of a problem. Well, I'm summoning something really big here. Let's see, what are we looking for here? Probably this. This guy's gonna ask it this question. Over and over again. See, banishing this card though to stop the activation is almost certainly a mistake. And that's definitely something I don't like about decks like this, is that you get a lot of activation prompts and you have to actually think about what the activation prompts are. And ideally I'd like a deck where you just can always activate it, and always activating it is the right move. See if we can negate it by doing that instead. Don't have a lot of options here, but may not matter too much. So I did run my macro fairly early in this morning, which is honestly not going to be that big of a deal, but it does mean that Wednesday might be a little bit longer on news, where there basically is no news today. I mean, we've got Censored Gaming here once again having troubles, his laptop dying, although in all fairness to Censored Gaming and even Dan's with a personal page, he didn't whine about this one anywhere as much as before, but I wouldn't be surprised if in the next couple weeks we get a video here where it's like, oh no, my laptop died, and so he's now had to get a new laptop, a cheap temporary replacement. which, okay, I mean, it happens. I'm somewhat sympathetic here. My AMD computer, I think it tries to overclock itself and runs into problems, and I still am having these weird things as I'm programming lately, where my computer and keyboard just seem to stutter, for lack of a better term, just stopped responding, and that really just should not be happening. One of the Cyber Monday Black Friday things I have to actually play here, I forgot, that I did see, and you may still be able to get this on Amazon, is there are deals for Intel and AMD CPUs. There are deals for computers. I didn't really see any details for motherboards, but I did see a deal for at least one power supply. Some of these very well may not be available. Do we want to summon this? Not particularly. So if you were in the market to build a new computer, now would not be a terrible time to start getting components for that and pulling the trigger. On that aspect. Right now, I don't expect there to be too much new. I don't think Intel is going to come out with a new whole technology or something like that, or AMD is going to come out with a new whole technology that's going to be that different. I haven't been paying a lot of attention to it, but it does, I think, come. It does seem to me like it is mostly the case where the Intel process in particular has not gotten to that newer nanometer level, which that would be the real expectation there, is that you would have the next generation of Intel CPUs at a smaller nanometer level, and it would just be a slightly more efficient processor. We're really not expecting much from CPUs as far as new technologies. It's not like they are going to engage in like deep level super sampling like video cards or ray tracing or any kind of crypto or thing like that. It'll probably be 4 to 8 years at minimum before we even started to see any kind of viable CPU that might have a artificial intelligence co-processing unit that kind of makes sense, but for the most part it really would feel like it is just going to be a gimmick. Yeah, it definitely would be a gimmick more along the lines of something like the trusted platform module being required by Windows 11. Like, nobody really has felt like that has been something that they really needed or benefited from. Well, it may have added some security. It probably didn't even add that much security. And that really would be the newest thing added to a CPU. Yes, AMD's Threadripper and the idea of better integrating the GPU RAM and CPU RAM are all concepts that are interesting, but again, I'm not sure that they're really actually implemented. And I definitely would say pretty much my whole life I've always been an Intel chip user up until this point. And while I may be getting some kind of performance improvement with AMD with my current computer, I am very much ready to switch back to Intel and stick with Intel. There's just a level of stability, probably because there isn't overclocking on that same level, that I'm not feeling. And twice having major problems with AMD and having actual RAM be broken because of AMD's Threadripper default overclocking nonsense is just a real issue. And I imagine we might see somewhat similar situations with the next Xbox, if there is even going to be a next Xbox. I definitely was wondering if maybe we would see Microsoft potentially pull completely out of hardware. Like, it would be kind of crazy, but it wouldn't be super crazy now that they've done this whole whoops, I don't know what happened there. I think I negated my own card on accident. Oh. And seemingly an attached material isn't doing anything. But yeah, I definitely could see Microsoft saying, hey, we own all these companies and we just really would prefer that everybody become a PC gamer. And the Xbox Series X and Series S is still good enough. That there is some level of amazing future, somewhat newer technologies in the PS5 and the Xbox, but there also are fairly old devices now, and yeah. Shared RAM between the CPU and GPU might be the new standard going forward. Well, we got that done. It might be the new standard going forward for PCs. Just move forward here to the next solo thing. Oh, I just have to do this with my deck. Well, we can play the Zodiac Tri-Brigade very easily then. And deep learning super sampling might be a thing. But there's not really a lot of reason to have circuitry that would record and stream at a higher AV1 codec type technology. And I don't know if there really is a great need for trusted platform module improvements or additions. More ray tracing on the graphics card. Deep learning super sampling would also be a graphics card thing. Like, honestly, you're probably best if you built a computer and got maybe a 380 instead of a 480 NVIDIA GTX card, and then waited for the inevitable 580 to upgrade, or didn't even buy a video card at all and just got one with integrated graphics, an Intel chip that could do integrated graphics, and then just living without the ability to game particularly well at all until 580 came out. Like, ideally you would kind of want to stagger your purchases so you're not spending $2,000 to $3,000 on a computer, but if you do that, inevitably something is going to be more expensive. Even a 2080, a good 2000 series graphics card would probably be fine. Do we have anything in the graveyard? Not really. Doing things a little bit different here than I normally would. Normally I would just be trying to attach everything so that it would be under one character so we could summon Zeus. And then I guess what we want to do is probably set this down. That was stupid. I didn't need to do that at all, did I? Just discard one of these. Destroy this. Don't destroy anything else. That does 36 damage. And then that lets me summon Zeus. And then the turn. Video Games Chronicle has this article that Gabe Newell has been ordered to make an in-person deposition in an antitrust case. This is funny because I honestly feel like Gabe Newell is probably the last person that's going to know anything at Valve. He really is, at this point, a mostly retired figurehead of Valve as far as I can tell. And yeah, I guess it would be an interesting question to try and figure out whether I suspect Gabe Newell or Doug Bowser is less important to the infrastructure of their company, since Doug Bowser, as the Nintendo of America president, is really, in my opinion, and it's always been my suspicion, whoever's in charge of Nintendo of America is really a very powerless figurehead, with Nintendo of Japan really controlling everything. In the case of Valve, I suspect Gabe Newell is a not powerless figurehead, and what he says is taken as important, certainly, but for the most part, I think he is somewhat easily overridden by other shareholders and other people who just are in Valve, that own stock in Valve, that I think are more likely to be active on a day-to-day basis. Which, at a certain level, maybe you get a certain amount of protection by having the Idiot King stereotype as your CEO, and then allowing the actual people and run things from behind the scenes. The people with actual power. try to get deck. Just have everything. That there is not a single thing here that he could do to make me not win this time. Maximum amount of damage here. One thing I'll say here though, Gabriel looks a lot better in this picture. Whenever this was taken, and feels like he's maybe lost some weight compared to the last time I saw him. He has looked better. There was definitely an interview where you heard him talking, and he was just not like able to get enough oxygen in him about a year ago, and it made him sound depressingly ill and sick. And maybe the weight loss, I mean, if I'm going to basically speculate that somebody losing weight doesn't inherently mean they're healthy. But yeah, you've got this long flowing Nordic hair going and this beard, and yeah, he looks better. I imagine though that this will not really lead to much. The lawsuit it's an antitrust lawsuit filed by Wolfire Games. They're claiming that somebody at Valve told them that their game would be delisted from Valve if they listed their game for a price cheaper anywhere else, even if they weren't delivering Steam keys when they sold it somewhere else, which would be antitrust. This is an accusation that's been made against several companies. Particularly, I think the same accusation has been made against Apple in the Apple Store, or Google in the Google Play Store, and yeah, it doesn't hold as much weight as you might think as an accusation, because there's a lot of examples of that not being the case. There's a lot of people that put their games out for free on other websites, and there's a lot of people that that do sell their games lower, and I wouldn't even be surprised if there's a decent amount of people that sell their games cheaper on other websites and then give Steam keys. Like inherently, the Humble Bundle was definitely doing that. Like that, there had to have been cases where I was getting Steam keys for like a penny or for free. I was donating the bare minimum necessary to get Steam keys on Humble Bundles back when Humble Bundles were worth getting. So yeah, is it possible that some product manager said the wrong thing and that's not really an official policy? Yes, it's very possible, particularly in Valve, where there's not that much of a good system in place to have a normal corporate structure. But yeah, if you were going to sue Valve for antitrust, you would have to make probably a more exotic argument to say they're just too big, which that argument might play these days with the FTC. But yeah, in general, if they were to just break up Valve because it's too big, they kind of have a hard time breaking it up anyways. Because you could take the non-profitable division of VR from Valve and make it its own separate company that would immediately fail or need to seek a whole bunch of funding. You could take the Steam Deck hardware sales, which maybe is profitable, but very possibly isn't profitable, and separate it. And that's such a new thing that it would definitely slow down the production and development of a Steam Deck 2. But you could split that into its own company. And you could split Valve from Steam and say that Valve as a company has to make video games and break that up that way. And then Valve might at that point have a real yeah, if Valve and Steam were separated, then Valve as a game development company would have to actually be a game development company and make games, which that might be better for consumers, but it also very possibly might just be a case where Valve proves that they can't really be a game development company and they fail. At a certain point, then Counter-Strike Go is the only moneymaker for Valve. But that's pretty much all you can do, is you break up the storefront Steam from Valve the game developer, from Valve the VR headset developer, and Valve the Steam Deck developer. And you probably don't even have a good argument to break up the VR division from the Steam Deck division. And if you did succeed at breaking up a software development company and a hardware development company on the argument that they're just too big, then you make this precedent where then Sony should be broken up from its hardware division versus its software division, and Microsoft should be broken up from its hardware versus software division. Nintendo should be broken up from its hardware and software division. It would create a terrible outcome almost certainly, because you would then have all the console makers refusing to make consoles because consoles are too expensive, or console makers making consoles that are $1,000 or $2,000, which, let's be honest here, that's really what the price point should be for the consoles if they were trying to be profitable. Is you'd be paying a very high price for consoles if they couldn't subsidize that with either Game Pass services or online pass services, or just getting a percentage cut from every licensed game. There is a better argument to say that they shouldn't be allowed to lock out unlicensed games, and sideloading on consoles is a much more attainable goal. To say, hey, if these consoles don't allow sideloading, we're going to crack down on them quite a bit. Although the US actually cracking down on anybody is very unlikely. I saw that starting this year, there's going to be a minimum 15% tax rate for corporations, and nobody really trusts that that is actually going to happen, that all of a sudden we're going to see every corporation paying more taxes instead of potentially just cheating one way or another. If they were going to really fix the tax cheating issue, they need to address the idea of generally accepted accounting practices, or GAAP, GAAP, and they need to establish more realistic accounting processes first. Yeah. I guess back to my idea, if Microsoft did pull out of the hardware market, that would be weird. If Microsoft pulled out of the hardware market, it would have to be because somebody else entered the hardware market, or Sony left the hardware market. Which I could see Sony also pulling out of the hardware market. It all seems somewhat feasible. Although Microsoft has much better of a argument as to why they would pull out, because they would still very much profit. Sony wouldn't. Sony leaving the hardware market is Sony just giving up on video games. Microsoft leaving the hardware market could be done. I could see a situation where the Nintendo Switch 2, whatever that was powerful enough to make some kind of license with Microsoft and just put all of Microsoft games on the Switch and all of Microsoft games on the PC, and the Steam Deck potentially becoming prevalent enough and maybe a little bit cheaper that there just isn't that need. And even potentially Best Buy stopping the sales of 4K UHD Blu-rays and Blu-rays in general might slow down the slow progress people were making towards buying 4K UHD TVs, which slows the need really to have a console that could play 4K UHD things. Right, so those 3 solo modes just got me that, and noticeably did not get me any of this. Fusion, Pendulum, Link Summoning, Monster. So yeah, I still kind of need to play this. Yeah. Synchro summoning in particular is just never going to happen. And fusion summoning is never going to happen. So what I would need to do is not edit deck, is change deck. And play something like this, which is a bunch of synchro summon. Let's see if we can just play one game here where we can synchro summon quite a bit. It feels like this is getting somewhat repetitive, and it might even be a case here where Bloober Team is trying to pressure Konami to make an announcement or say something in general, but they once again have come out and said, we're diligently working on Silent Hill 2 remake. It attains the highest quality on behalf of the development. We'd really like to clarify that the production is progressing smoothly and in accordance to our schedule. We understand that many players around the world are eagerly anticipated with news about the game, and we appreciate your dedication. However, we kindly ask for a bit more patience. Once Konami, the game publisher, shares more information, we are confident that the wait will be worthwhile. Yeah. So it feels like there might even just be a little bit of push happening here by Bloober Team to try and get Konami to make some kind of statement. But it also definitely feels like they are probably getting bombarded with questions and such. At a certain point, though, that is an example of a development team and the person in charge of their Twitter and in charge of their communications in general just having too thin of a skin. Like, you're going to be bombarded with questions, and you probably should just not respond or act like you even received the questions. It's good to be bombarded with enthusiastic questions versus being received with absolute uninterest. But yeah, I imagine Silent Hill 2 Remake is progressing along fine. There is a danger even in making this statement. I would be afraid that Konami's going to get upset, and then Konami's going to just cancel the project completely. If I was Bloober Team and I was remaking Silent Hill 2, I definitely would have backup plans to say, hey, at any point we're going to sell this exact game as something different and just strip out the copyrighted Silent Hill 2 stuff, because this project may get canceled and we have no reason to throw away this code when we can just change it. Which I think that's legal. Like, at a certain point, I guess if a publisher is paying somebody to make code, then the publishing entity might own the code, but I wouldn't make a contract that way. I would say, hey, our employees are gonna own the copyright on this code. Bloober Team is gonna own the copyright on this code. You own your copyright certainly, but if this project falls through, we're going to take what we've learned and we're gonna take what we learned and make a different game. And inherently, even if the code all has to be thrown away, you could still make an argument to that what the programmers have learned is still in their head. So you could start over from scratch and rewrite almost exactly the same code a second time. Yeah, and that's a little bit iffy, but fairly common too. Like the code I've written for the smart on-air sign, if I had to throw it all away and rewrite the exact same code, it would look almost exactly the same. Like there'd be a slight difference here and there, but no major difference. And honestly, there's only a few ways you could write the code and make it work. One thing I'm also thinking about on the on-air sign is that there is a potential way here to make a build one yourself kit. I'm gonna research how easy and what for the $10,000 piece of equipment I would need, and this would be something that would come out as a long time in the future. But if I could laser cut acrylic pieces and print on acrylic pieces, I could flat pack the smart on air sign a lot more, and then effectively have just a CAD model that would make the entire package fit in like a padded postage mailer instead of in a box shipping a bunch of air. I don't know if there really would be a whole bunch of savings there for the amount of extra effort it would be for somebody to just assemble assemble it and put it together itself, but it's certainly a thought. Instead of using acrylic, I could do what you see on a lot of these like STEM projects where you have laser cut wood, very thin, like balsa wood, I think it is. But yeah, that's really just a secondary thought. If anything, it's a third step, certainly. It would be smarter and easier just to sell the chip pre-programmed with some wires hanging off of it and mail that in a envelope as a piece of postage, effectively. Or a padded envelope, probably, but yeah. That would make more sense than having a entire flat packed thing. Of course, if I could flat pack in acrylic enclosure to hold the on-air signs, so that there would be 6 faces to make a cube or a rectangular thing, and then there would be 2 LED strips and the switch and the chip, which is all it really needs. That would ensure that I could always make the smart on-air signs, even if it would look a little bit cheaper, instead of having to rely on another manufacturer, which is doing injection molding plastic to make the enclosure and all of that. Cutting out a middleman effectively and guaranteeing a level of supply. But yeah, I wouldn't be surprised if people don't actually like that idea, per se, or if it is just a very different audience that likes that idea, like the do-it-yourselfers liking that idea. And I don't know if there really would be even that much wiggle room. It might be way more expensive to make a do-it-yourself kit and sell it with all the acrylic versus not doing that. Which it definitely doesn't make sense if the final, more visually polished form of the product is cheaper than the do-it-yourself product by a significant amount. I saw this article, so I googled it to bring it up here. Apparently, according to one source, I don't know what the source is, this was a Eurogamer article, I googled this up, but apparently 83% of mobile games fail after 3 years. 3 years after launch, with almost half are being canceled during development, which there is no real way to know whether those numbers are in line or not with the come on, that should let me do something. Come on. Yeah, I don't know if that's really in line with console games. I'm fairly certain that 83% of console games don't fail, quote unquote, in 3 years. But there is also certainly a situation there where there is also certainly a situation there where most games are released and they only care about the first 6 months or so of the launch window, 6 months, 6 weeks. There is a slight difference, though, of a game kind of just becoming old and then getting a boost in sales every now and then, that there's a Steam sale, but still being very playable, and then, say, a AAA live service game that has to completely shut down, which inherently, that is, I think, the issue that you run into, is that if you are comparing live service games to mobile games, almost all mobile games are live service games, and so they are competing against each other far too much and failing far too often. I wouldn't be surprised if half or more of all games in AAA console games are canceled during development. You would have to kind of do a deep dive, create a database of every development company that you know, every game dev, and then try and calculate out how many years they've gone without releasing a game, to try and figure out even a small chance of understanding how many games are canceled during development. But even that method really wouldn't work, because I wouldn't be surprised if games get pitched all the time amongst developers, and they're thinking of 3 or 4 different types of games and pitching them and working on them all the time, and then one of those 3 or 4 different games in a 4-year period does get made and get released, so it still looks like the developers are releasing 100% of all the games they developed, when they really aren't. This screenshot, by the way, is terrible. All these screens look really, really dirty. But yeah, to briefly talk about the 4 different mobile games I'm still playing and wasting a lot of time with, which over the weekend I even wasted more time on, so I really have to hold myself accountable for being stupid and just not working. In all fairness, I wasn't working because I made YouTube Shorts and worked on my macro to get YouTube Shorts scheduled, so I think I finally got that working now, where that's going to be fairly automated, but the whole process is slow as all get out. 3 or 4 hours it took me of just not being able to use my computer as the macro is playing back. But yeah, there definitely is an argument that if I won the lottery, if I had an infinite amount of money, I would just build another computer and have the macros run on that while I'm doing something else. But even at that, if I'm making macros and streaming to Twitch while I'm making macros, and YouTube, well, if I'm making YouTube Shorts and streaming to Twitch while I'm making YouTube Shorts, is what I meant to say, then that would prevent me from being able to record or stream. Well, I could record, but I couldn't stream. But yeah, Star Trek Lower Decks really doesn't have anything new or interesting happening to it as a game, and it feels like I am very quickly, and this is the weird part, is of the 4 games I started playing probably just 3 or 4 months ago, I'm very quickly starting to feel like I've hit the end game saturation point, if there even is one, of 3 or 4 of the games already. But yeah, Star Trek Lower Decks, I'm on like episode 74 of a game that maybe has 80 episodes already, and they have their constantly rotating events, but the actual gameplay mechanic is pretty terrible. Why can I not do anything? I should be able to synchro summon something, but apparently not. Junk synchron and a non-tuner monster. Oh, I guess I probably needed to summon something different. Well, we'll see what happens there. The adult game Tinkafuma has a level that goes up and up, and it has just stopped at level 60. So I don't know if somehow I've caught up to the max level of the game and they are going to add more content, or if they just hit a max level and stopped making content at some point. But clearly the character level has room for a third digit, so I should be going higher and higher, and yet I'm not. I'm just maxed out at 60. The main story quests all seem to pretty much max out at 60, although some of the battles, a couple of them, maybe just 2 out of 100, feel like I'm gonna have to improve my characters and upgrade my characters a little bit just to get through those battles, which leaves Tinkafuma for the most part just pushing people towards the ever rotating events also, which, yeah, maybe that will work, maybe that won't work, but it is going to get fairly quickly. And so I'm feeling like I'm probably about 60% saturated on Tinkafuma. I'm probably somewhere closer to 90% saturated. Alright, so which one of these cards has the highest attack? That's the question. Turbo Synchron would be the first thing. So we have Junk Synchron here, which means we probably can only summon that. Let's okay, so we just need a non-tuner monster. Just trying to figure out what card would be the best one to play. Let's go ahead and play this one. Okay, that should be a non-tuner monster. Nothing here says tuner. Oh, but it's a warrior, not a monster. Let's see. Non-tuner monsters. You don't need any special card to synchro summon, as far as I understand. Let's play this card next, Rockstone Warrior, and see if that works. I don't even understand this deck. Why do I have so many warrior cards? As far as Memento Mori, I had been playing on World 14, which was the newest when I started, and then they made a new World 15, which is a weird system, certainly, in it is inherently encouraging people, instead of just playing the one world, it's encouraging people who hit a point and can't play anymore, which is very easy to achieve in Memento Mori, where you you just aren't going to get any kind of resources until the next day comes by. So there's literally nothing you can do. So why not play a different world? On one level, it creates this weird situation where you're what this does. I was expecting that to do more. Still not working. All I want to do is synchro summon. So yeah, whales could play literally 15 different worlds and spend money on 15 different worlds and really accomplish the same thing by wasting several hours playing World 15 and just starting the game over from scratch. I was trying to see if there was a re-roll possibility there or a better way to play from the beginning, and honestly there really isn't. Like, there's a strategy guide I saw that said you should wait until you hit fairly far into the game, but I haven't even gotten that far into the game in my main save before you spend any crystals, but if you don't spend any crystals, I can't imagine you're going to have a very pleasant time playing the game in the first place. I just don't think you'd progress very well. It is very much a game where you're going to get at least 1,000 crystals, and it costs 300 to summon every single day. So you're going to get 2 or 3 summons every single day, and you need to do 2 or 3 summons every single day just to try and make progress. But yeah, playing the newer world has really didn't change much. There at best maybe was one character that you would be rewarded with, and maybe re-rolling would give you a different character there, but yeah, it definitely doesn't make a lot of sense to play 2 save files. That's just going to waste time. But while I am wasting time, I'll give it a little bit more time, but I almost certainly will give up on World 15 and just focus on World 14. Memento Mori is the one game I don't feel like I've really saturated my entertainment with as a game that plays itself and has very little you can do after you've done your dailies. Almost nothing can be done after you've done your dailies, which would be a good thing, except for I'm enjoying it. So there will almost certainly be a flip where eventually I'll get bored with Memento Mori, and doing the dailies will be appreciated in the sense that it won't take that much work. Whereas any game that I'm actively having to spend a lot of work on and not really enjoying the story will just become annoying, which is the case for 7 Mortal Sins Ecstasy, which has a whole lot more than any of the other games as far as daily quests and things like that. But there is, even in that, a level of saturation that I'm just not really appreciating. This is just not working. What's going to be annoying here is that I'm going to draw a card that says Synchro Summon Monsters and realize that you do need a spell card to Synchro Summon. That definitely isn't how I understood it. I thought Synchro Summoning did not require a spell. But I could be wrong. Anyways, yeah, it definitely makes sense that 83% of mobile games fail, because way more than 83% of mobile games are bad. Finally. So it must have been that monster was on the field, stopping me from even that doesn't fully make sense. But yeah, I also wouldn't be surprised if you held most games to that same standard, though, that you would say most console games and most PC games also fail in 3 years. That they get their money and then they shut down, and that would be considered a failing thing. Even games as services, I wouldn't be surprised if 83% of those games that are expecting to go on for a long time still get shut down in 3 years. And shut down is probably the better term to use instead of failing, because defining failure is a lot more difficult than just saying, hey, this game doesn't last that long. Which, if you're talking single solo player games, nobody's expecting a single solo player game to last anywhere close to 3 years. Yeah, there maybe are a few exceptions of that, like Skyrim, but the vast majority of single player solo games are played for just a couple of weeks. Apparently, according to GameDeveloper.com, the game High on Life is becoming a scripted podcast, from a shooter to a scripted series, which is an interesting idea, although I would say podcast definitely indicates that they only feel like the script is so good, instead of making it a animated show on YouTube or a animated show on Cartoon Network, airing right after Rick and Morty, which would kind of make a lot of sense also. Yeah, I would imagine a lot of the humor in High on Life is very much ad-libbed and irreverent, I think is the right word to use. So I wouldn't be surprised if it's a podcast where people are just ad-libbing and being silly. There was one of those that I listened to a few years back, and it was fairly funny. On the general idea of it, the problem with that podcast before it fully stopped making episodes, though, is that they were doing the exact same bits episode to episode, and improv in general is just the exact same bits. Whose Line Is It Anyways is a great example of that. You watch the first Whose Line Is It Anyways episode of your life and you'll find it fairly funny. You watch the millionth episode of Whose Line Is It Anyways, and you'll find it incredibly repetitive. And even in that Whose Line Is It As It's Anyways, I can't say it, that name, can I? They have a whole bunch of gimmicks and games to try and keep it varied. And when I think podcast, I generally expect something that has a reason to continuously go on. So something that is just for entertainment value, that's not doing any kind of news at all, or having and is just constantly an evergreen product, is fairly weird. Sometimes you have podcasts that go back and look into the past and talk about things that have already happened, but there's still a limitation on how many different things they can talk about, and usually they have some element of talking about new things too. Calling a scripted series like High on Life a podcast is probably doing it disservice, and it would have been better to call it a audio drama, which is probably the better phrase to use. A limited series, or call it a limited series podcast, if you want to use the phrase podcast. But leaving it open-ended seems crazy. It also is worth taking a step back and questioning whether this isn't a case where Squanch Games, I believe is the name of the company, isn't wasting your time in focusing on the podcast in the same way that Borderlands had their podcast, and I think they still have their podcast, instead of preferably focusing in preferably I would like it to focus on making more games. GameDeveloper.com also goes, biggest selling point for High on Life was the arsenal of talking guns with a voice cast led by Rick and Morty co-creator Justin Roiland. Earlier this year, Roiland was dropped from various projects and exited Squanch following allegations and charges of domestic violence back in 2020, which I think it's worth pointing out, charges that were proven false or dismissed. I'm not sure the exact story. Yeah, definitely a cancel attempt, and they're not mentioning these. Yeah, those charges were later dismissed, although allegations regarding sexual assault, some dating back to 2013, were reported months later, which, yeah, again, cancel culture attempts. It's kind of impossible to trust any of that or believe any of that at this point. Allegations should be made in court of laws, not in the court of public opinion. By this point, Roland's High on Life character Kenny was written out of the story. Expansion had been replaced from Rick and Morty, and he'd been replaced in Rick and Morty by new actors Cardini Rick and Harry Belden as Morty, which I haven't heard too many people complain about the new voices on Rick and Morty. But I haven't heard too many people even say anything about Rick and Morty. I wouldn't be surprised if there's just a lack of interest in Rick and Morty at this point, as an older show. So, yeah. Making an audio podcast instead of making another game at Squanch, the people who are still at Squanch, it seems like they are getting distracted from what they should be doing. And Justin Roiland is apparently unemployed at this point, as far as I could tell, and unemployable, it seems. Moving on, GameDeveloper.com says 24 Entertainment's Naraka Blade Point hits the 40 million players. That is a very high mark, certainly. It definitely feels like Naraka Blade Point is not being talked about as much as it should be. And as we start to think of Game of the Year, we should question if it deserves more awards than it's really getting. Video Games Chronicle has that same article. Bloober Team asking for patience. Silent Hill, as it says, things are progressing smoothly. Need to synchro summon as much as possible, even if it's not the right move. Well, I also do want to win. very much want to be done with that proficiency. Unfortunately, I think I'm gonna have to work on that next stream. The good news is we have a win streak here of 1, so that gives us a buffer to continue to play Synchro of Unity, and we can do 1 more Synchro Summon, and then we'd have to switch to a different deck that would run Polymerization. I need to do all that before the month wraps around. Go ahead and collect things from the Battle Pass. I guess if you were short on gems, skipping the Battle Pass for a few weeks would be something you really could do very easily. Because, yeah. I wouldn't skip it more than 3 weeks overall, though. I guess we're slowly increasing our Duelist level too, which means nothing really. So, Jeff Keighley went on his YouTube live stream talking about the Game Awards as far as doing a live Q&A, and that created several bits of news here. The Game Awards security will be tightened to prevent another stage incident, which is good to make that claim. It's bad that you had to make that claim and you didn't have security fairly tight in the first place. Any new endeavor you should make, security should be on your forefront, whether it's security technologically or security physically. It should definitely be the first thing. Like, you have a responsibility to yourself and any other employees you have to create a safe working environment, and the Game Awards is effectively a working environment, and not just for yourself and employees, but also anyone else that might be a guest there. And Jeff Keighley failed at doing that, which in general has added to my own opinion that Jeff Keighley is just kind of maybe a nice guy, but a bad boss, just not qualified for doing what he's doing. He also said that the Game Awards considered adding a Best Remake or Best Supporting Actor awards, but the producer Jeff Keighley says each has their own pros and cons, which is definitely not a good excuse. Everything has its own pros and cons. There's almost certainly always going to be a Best Remake category that you could fill in any awards ceremony, so it definitely, the only reason why you'd say let's not do Best Remakes is because then that would potentially mean something like the Resident Evil 7 game would potentially be not given a chance to win Game of the Year when it should win Game of the Year. But arguably, I would say that probably is right. Like, regardless of how much creative effort it took to totally remake Resident Evil 7, you still are very much leaning on a already written story narrative, whether you're changing a few things or not, an already designed video game with levels and game concepts, and you probably should give a Game of the Year to games that are brand new concepts, or at least sequels to brand new concepts, instead of being remakes. And I would be fine with saying Game of the Year awards and other awards like that should be categories of remakes. And if you did create a Best Remake, then you could say Best Audio for a remake, Best Visuals for a remake. You could easily double the number of awards you're giving out, which would be very helpful in the Game Awards in general, is to just have more awards. Best Supporting Actor doesn't make any sense at all to not have a award for Best Supporting Actor. There are enough games out there that have characters that are considered or could be considered as supporting actors each year to give away those awards. And inherently, as far as video game awards are concerned at all, yes, there is a possibility that some year might be very limited in the number of games that were made, and there might just be some categories that have only one nomination or no nominations at all. But deal with that when it happens. Right now, as the Game Awards tries to be the Oscars for video games, they should try to add as many awards as possible, add as much prestige as possible. The more people you hand awards to, the more video game developers will actually care about those awards. So you should be handing them out like candy, in my opinion. Keeley also explains why the Game Awards are moving away from the world premiere branding, which I suspect means they are just anticipating that they aren't going to have as many world premiere games, and that we will just see more games getting premiered originally from Nintendo Directs, PlayStation Directs, Xbox Directs, those equivalent presentations. Plus, the Game Awards happen so late in the year, and needs to be so late in the year, that the idea of premiering games during that time is just not ideal for the games themselves. But he does say that you should expect a similar number of reveals this year. I couldn't name a single reveal that came out last year, however. Inherently, the Game Awards still has major problems in that none of it feels relevant or remarkable. The most remarkable thing about the Game Awards being that somebody got on stage and breached security. You know, that's the thing I remember from the last Game Awards. I don't remember a single game that won. I don't remember a single award person giving a speech, because I don't think any of them did give speeches. It is just a big problem there, and it's not like the games are even promoting the fact that they won the 2022 Game Awards. Like, I haven't seen any games promote that or have a sale based on that or even tweet about it, really, which again is perhaps a case of not giving away enough awards. And then Keeley weighed in on the debate over whether Dave the Diver should qualify for Best Indie Game. It was nominated at the Game Awards despite being funded by a billion-dollar publisher. This was a situation where the game was half in development by an indie game company called Mint Rocket. Which then I believe was acquired by Nexon, a South Korean company worth $1.8 billion in revenue in 2021 alone. That's my understanding of the situation, is that it was half in development and then the company became acquired, or which, yeah, I don't. The problem here is you have to figure out what is the purpose of having an indie game category in the first place. And once you figure out why you're segregating games out and giving awards to indie games versus just games of developers, then you can understand why Dave the Diver should or shouldn't qualify. And so, just thinking through it right now, the reason why you would segregate indie games is because you're assuming that the games at no point had extra funding from a publisher to advertise, to do a 4-year consideration campaign for an award, to polish the game up and make it look like a AAA game with hyper-realistic graphics. Um, in the case of Dave the Diver, if they were acquired or given money in any way from a publisher at any point during the release of the game, then it can't really be considered an indie game at that point, can it? Because they're getting that advantage. Even if it's post release, even if the company was acquired at like 6 months or a year later, if you can do a 4-year consideration campaign and send out presents and wine and things like that to the people who vote on the game awards, to the judges, I mean, that's an unfair advantage. If you can just promote your game, if it was a People's Choice Award where people were voting on it, but then you have a publisher that can spend more money to get more people to vote for Dave the Diver, it's not an indie game. Yeah, in fact, I can't, off the top of my head thinking this through, I can't think of a single reason why it should be considered an indie game. Like, there's really no excuse here that it should be considered. And the only reason I could see that you would even try to make the argument that it is a indie game is because you're trying to get it to win awards it doesn't deserve to be nominated for. And this feels very much like mainstream video game journalism, which Jeff Keighley definitely feels like he is in bed with, trying to pick and choose a favorite and being very corrupt about it. Yeah. It's actually very easy in my mind to say if something is going to qualify for an indie game award, it's got to be independent throughout its entire development process and throughout its launch window of coming out. A publisher cannot step in that first 6 weeks to 6 months launch window, whatever they want to call their launch window. You could certainly, for the awards ceremony sake, say in the first 6 weeks, there cannot, the company still has to be independent even at that point, outside of its launch window. And I would say launch window of a non-early access version of the game. So a game that was indie and in early access for years, and then the publisher comes out, still would not qualify as being indie if a publisher came and released version 1.0 of a game. Also, if a game was being developed by a publisher and then the publisher dropped them and then they worked after that point as an independent company to finish the game and release it, in that rare case, even then I still wouldn't say it qualifies as being indie. It's got to be indie from beginning to past the launch window. It's an easy definition. It's the only one that makes sense for the reason that you would have indie game awards in the first place. In most other cases, I'd be fine with them just giving away awards willy-nilly and having very loose definitions as to what qualifies, but in this case in particular, if you're going to have any integrity whatsoever, they need to write down stronger rules and exclude Dave the Diver from the indie category. Of course, Jeff Keighley here is just passing the buck and saying ultimately it's the jury awards, the Game Awards jury, that picks nominees. And who is the Game Awards jury? That is mainstream video game journalism. Like, absolutely. And it definitely feels like there should be stricter rules and regulations on what the jury can nominate and what they can't nominate. Otherwise, we're going to increasingly see the jury giving awards to people that are not really deserving, and it's going to just create a lot of controversy and people less and less interested in the Game Awards, which even now I don't think people are really that interested in them. Apparently the Spider-Man 2 voice actor for Venom said that they just used 10% of the dialogue recorded. Tony Todd revealed some of the content which didn't make the cut. At a certain level, 10% sounds like a very small amount, but it doesn't really seem that odd, because on one hand you have a situation where the voice actor is playing Venom, so I could see them making a very talkative Venom by default at first, and then having all the voice lines recorded, and then very quickly realizing that they don't really want Venom to be that talkative. I could see a Venom version, a Venom character not saying anything, or just saying Spider-Man or something like that, having a 5 to 20 word dialogue being recorded. On the more generic end, it's fairly reasonable that they would say, give me 10 growls in a row, and you would just go growl, 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 growl. Well, there you've recorded 10 growls. One of those might be used, and so 10% of the dialogue recorded would be used. Or they'd say, give me 10 Spider-Mans in a row. Like, you very easily could have a sound producer telling the voice actor to just do each line that they've written 10 times in a row, so that they are sure they've got it. And 10 times is not even that much. Like, you could easily, if you have longer dialogue or dialogue you're struggling with, have to say the lines 30 or 40 times. Like, the number could go up quite high. Of course, you could also have producers that say just do it once and that's good enough. And yeah, that tends not to be the experience as far as I understand it in voice acting. So overall, as a gamer, does that mean anything to me? Not really. Does it make me want to play Spider-Man 2 more or less? Not really. There is possibility here that they had him record a whole bunch of Venom voice lines in the hopes that maybe they wouldn't have to bring him back and pay him again for a Venom spin-off game, which maybe his contract was written in that weird way, or that they're getting him to do a whole bunch of lines of dialogue in the hopes that they can take his voice acting and then replace it with AI generated voice acting that sounds exactly like him. That's also a fear, certainly. But yeah, it seems fairly normal that a significant amount of your voice acting dialogue may not end up in the game, which, as far as a game player goes, yeah, you'd almost have to poll people or get people to come out and say they felt like Venom should have talked more in Spider-Man 2. But it just doesn't feel like anybody had that complaint. So, and yeah, I imagine voice actors want to hear more of their work actually make it to production, but in the case of video game voice acting, that's, if you get paid, is much more of a focus, or if you get paid well is much more of a focus, than whether or not you're cut from the 90% of what you recorded is cut from the game. Although in all fairness, this is very much in the same line of somebody thinking that they were going to be an extra in a movie, or being even a major character in a movie, and then the director completely cutting the character or cutting the extra and not telling them, or telling them, and then them being upset about the fact that they are not in a movie that they thought they were going to be in. But it really should be a minor complaint compared to just getting paid. and being treated well and not being replaced by AI is a higher growing concern. Also, Video Games Chronicle had this review for the Nikon Revolution 5 Pro, and what caught me about this headline, since I don't generally look at Video Games Chronicle reviews, is that it's a $200 PlayStation 5 controller that's been hamstrung by Sony, which, yeah, it seems like Microsoft's effort to stop non-authorized controllers can only be exaggerated and highlighted more if you have a PlayStation controller here that looks like it's got a lot of extra back buttons. One of the things I would say that is an issue with third-party controllers in general is that there's just not a lot of support for either console. But I'd say PlayStation is probably worse. But then again, very few people are going to pay $200 for a controller like this. And while it looks like a fairly nice controller, it's not $200 nice. Alright, let's see. Now, I have very little news today. I didn't work on the SteamDB charts, so let's see if we can get this sorted correctly. Rika Blade Point having a 24-hour peak of 240,000 players, taking the number 5 spot. And then everything else seeming to be just about the same. Yeah, my chart still somewhat broken, but I am seeing Lethal Company getting a big spike up again. I watched Captain Sparkles as a YouTuber play a little bit of that and very quickly lost interest. Call of Duty seeing a spike up. In general, it looks like everything's getting a little bit of spike up this Monday compared to over the weekend, where it felt like it was dropping. Although Naraka Blade Point actually is kind of a little low, and Apex Legends is very low, and PUBG is skyrocketed, but it's also getting some drops. So yeah, overall trend I suspect here is that we'll see a little bit more people playing games over this week, and in general I think probably to the new year, as people have maybe a little bit more time off and a little bit less light to go and do things outside. Although Christmas will probably be a few days, December 25th, 26th, those will probably be days we don't see that much gaming happening. And that's going to bring us to the Video Games Chronicle news, which most of these we've already talked about, I bet. The TikTok parent company has confirmed that its game biz is restructuring and that hundreds of employees are going to be potentially affected. ByteDance owns Marvel Snap publisher Newverse, which might affect Marvel Snap and its developer Second Dinner, which, yeah, I haven't even looked at Marvel Snap in months and honestly couldn't care if it failed, because it definitely doesn't feel like it succeeded. Anyways, the list is getting longer and longer as far as places that have laid off companies, employees, game developers in general. Which, yeah, despite all these layoffs, nobody's really predicting a slow 2024 as far as game development, games getting released and games being developed, when logically somebody probably should make that estimate. We already talked about this, and this, and this, and this, and this, The Division Heartland has been rated, suggesting its release could be close. The game is set in the America Midwest following the events of the first game. Which, yeah. I felt like they had already made a sequel and released a sequel to The Division, but maybe not. Maybe they've just been teasing it for a long time. 25 years later, Virtua Fighter 3 is getting a new arcade version. The new online-enabled version will be released in Japan next week. We kind of had already talked about this. The Virtua Fighter 3 TB, or is it TE or TL? Maybe I'm misreading it. No, it says Virtua Fighter 3 TB. This must mean that Virtua Fighter is still very popular in Japan arcades. That's the only thing I could assume there. Which, yeah, it's believable. It also probably speaks to the fact that people going to arcades in Japan are probably in their 30s or 40s too. Anytime you start to say 25 years later and you're selling or reselling the same product, you're almost certainly selling it to an older audience instead of finding a new audience. I wouldn't be surprised if kids and teenagers don't go to inside of arcades in Japan at all. And then Ubisoft said it was a technical error that the pop-up ads in Assassin's Creed were popping up in the wrong place in the middle of the game. They were supposedly supposed to pop up at the beginning of the game or in after the credits. But yeah, inherently they made the ads and they were planning on showing the ads somewhere. So, and I very much suspect that there was no error, that this was an experiment, and now they're just blaming the poor reception of the experiment of having ads in the middle of your gameplay, which you can see here. They were almost certainly experimenting and then now trying to pull back from that experiment without taking any blame. Anyways, that brings us to Gematsu articles. King Arthur Knight's Tale expansion Legion 9 has been announced, which is not a game I really recognize. Yep. And I ran my macro early this morning, so it's again very possible there will be a lot more news on Wednesday. And that's a mistake. Yuna and the Haunted Hot Springs, the thrilling steamy maze Kiwami, has been announced for PC. Which, okay. As a game, it's not looking amazingly interesting, although it does seem like the main focus here is showing anime girls in some level of undress, which, yeah, Hot Springs pretty much means that. This might be the game I saw an article on that is going to be somewhat censored in its release, but that might also be a different game. Yeah. There definitely was one visual novel, and I can't remember the name of it now, that announced it was coming to Steam, and the assumption there is that it was going to be censored on Steam. But we really haven't had that much confirmed as far as censorship on Steam lately, and if anything, we've seen a major increase in seemingly completely uncensored games being released on Steam in the adult section. So I think Steam as a storefront is probably going in the right direction. Less censorship, not more. But I wouldn't be surprised if there's an occasional thing that happens here or there that does lead to censorship. Moving on, the fantasy action RPG Arisen Force Von Emir has been announced for all consoles and PC. So, see what Steam has to say about this. Yep, it definitely looks like one of these GB modern Final Fantasy spin-off games. Need a better term to describe those. Dragon Quest Monsters, The Dark Prince details 4 monsters, synthesis, story, and reverse search feature. If you want to check all of that out on Gamatsu. This week's Japanese game releases include Dragon Quest Monsters, The Dark Prince, Otogi Katsugeki, Mamida no Bakaru, Oracle, Saitaru no Sainan, and more. That was way too much Japanese for me to bother to try and read. So we've got one game for the Switch, Batman Arkham Trilogy for the Switch, another game 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 for the Switch, and then Gravity Circuit for the PS5 and Switch, and then another game for a Switch, another game for a Switch, and then RoboCop Rogue City for a PS5, which inherently that highlights that there's literally 1 or 2 games coming out for the PS5 on a weekly basis. The Switch is dominating. Crazy. Nintendo would really have to screw up their next console to not completely dominate the Japanese market to the point where PlayStation potentially has one last generation to compete, or it's going to fail completely in Japan, which probably means they just stop making PlayStation consoles overall. Digitally only, everything is for the Switch except for Roller Dome on Xbox Series, which is weird. They're not even really trying to list or release games for the Xbox specifically in Japan because the Xbox sells so poorly there. It's a fairly uninteresting week overall, although Dragon Quest is super popular, so for the Dragon Quest fans, of which there's a lot, people will be playing that in Japan. Otherwise, there's not really any competition, probably because they know that Dragon Quest Monsters was releasing this week. Also, in part just because, we're past Black Friday. We're past the point where a lot of games would be purchased or sold for Christmas, and I imagine we will see that as a case for the rest of the year, is that we just won't see a lot of new games being released. Overall, not any big important new games. Moving on, Dragon Ball FighterZ rollback netcode public beta for PC is set for November 30th through December 1st. I don't feel like that's really good reason to make another YouTube short. But this is a 2018 game that I own some of, but I don't think I own all of, as far as all the characters, and I haven't gotten around to playing it. But yeah, it must be still very popular as a fighting game, in that it is worthwhile to add the rollback netcode as a concept. But the general concept of rollback netcode still is being very poorly implemented in fighting games. A lot of fighting games promising it and then never delivering it, or delivering it really late after the game has already been released. And yeah, arguably we need something like a Unreal Engine or Unity engine to have rollback netcode built in by default and very easy to program without taking a lot of extra work, which is probably a big ask. And in general, I'm not sure you can do a great job making a fighting game in the Unreal Engine anyways, or Unity engine. Probably easier in the Unreal Engine than the Unity engine. The detective adventure game, Detective Instinct Farewell My Beloved, has been announced for PC. Which, if you told me that this was a game from the late 90s, I would believe you. It's also English only, which I guess that is a statement that Komatsu is not 100% only talking about Japanese released games. Which, yeah, that was always true. It just sometimes doesn't feel like it's true. And we talked about Virtua Fighter 3 TB Online being announced for arcades in Japan. Questionable very much if you'd ever see it in an arcade in the West. There aren't that many arcades in the West left. And then a Pacific Drive Physical Edition has been announced. I don't even fully remember which game was Pacific Drive. There's several games where the idea of driving is mentioned, or the name Drive is mentioned. Then that quickly brings us to GameDeveloper.com, which will quickly get us away from GameDeveloper.com too, because there just won't be that many stories. Here's an interesting one. ReedPop is investigating the sale of Eurogamer, GameIndustry.biz, and Rock Paper Shotgun and Moors. The PAX organizer is seeking buyers for the UK-based Gamer Network business. Now this is Gamer with an E, not Gamer with a U, which was the company that just shut down effectively, or got everybody to quit at The Escapist, which I've heard nothing from The Escapist since then. So I doubt that they are succeeding particularly well. It is somewhat questionable, just reading the headline here, what ReedPop really wants to do, other than perhaps just cut its losses and sell everything off and take the money and run. Because while ReedPop may be still in charge of making E3, I don't think they are actually. All they have is PAX and running PAX if they got rid of all their other investments. Which, I mean, at a certain point, I wouldn't be surprised if these are not profitable investments either, though. I think, if anything, it might give me a lot of hope to realize or hear that very few people are going to Eurogamer or GameIndustry.biz or Rock Paper Shotgun, because these are definitely the kinds of mainstream video game journalist sites that were more interested in being SJWs and promoting cancel culture attempts than they were really interested in writing reviews about games or saying anything of talking about video games at all. So yeah, I wouldn't be surprised if all these companies do get sold off and then eventually just wither on the vine, and then ReedPop is left just running PAX events and making a decent amount of money on PAX events and doing nothing else. Particularly, it will be interesting to see who's willing and who's capable of purchasing those sites if they're actually worth anything. It almost feels like 10-20 years down the line you could just buy Eurogamer.com for $100 if you wanted to and make your own website, and that the name is about the only thing of value. In a lot of ways, it's the implication of what the name means that's of value. Eurogamer.com implies that this is a valid, good source for European gamers. Whether that's true or not, GameIndustry.biz implies that it's a valid good source for the game industry people, which for all I know it isn't. We already talked about the TikTok maker ByteDance restructuring its video game business. Togi Productions has acquired a space for the Unbound developer Mojinkin Studio. Again, two companies I don't recognize. The actual acquisitions, when announced from GameDeveloper.com, are almost always two completely unheard of companies, very small companies. Although, in all fairness, the only big acquisition to talk about this entire year would have been the Microsoft Activision Blizzard merger. Those big acquisitions and mergers just don't happen that often. And then this is an old story. Rockstar axed the game development around the game agent for distracting from GTA 5's development, which what they call distracting, I would say, is probably just people spending more time developing games than what Rockstar really wants, and noticeably having, since the point in which GTA 5 was released, Agent didn't get more developed, and nothing else really got more developed other than the GTA Online gambling aspect, which is all they really cared about. So yeah, Rockstar, not somebody as a company that I feel like is doing good by gamers, and is, if anything, being very lazy and being very greedy, which is a combination you don't want to see in a publisher or developer. Steam fall list cleanup. We've got some games here, like the Trolls game. Not particularly relevant after a month. It is a kids game though, so I wouldn't be surprised if reviews are just kind of short always. And then this Dreamy Trail. I don't know why I would have even put this on the fall list. It looks too much like Walking Simulator, because it is, and like an asset flip game. Probably best excuse I could make is that I put Dreamy Trail on the fall list before I saw 5 other copies of games that looked exactly like Dreamy Trail, and that would, I guess, always happen, in that you would see something that looks interesting, put it on the fall list, and then realize it isn't that interesting because people are just ripping it off left and right, or it is just a rip-off or a low-effort game in itself. Drift Rain here is not doing well enough to stay on the fall list. If anything, I need to be more cruel on what I keep on the fall list and what I don't, because I definitely am not going through the fall list to shop per se, or doing a fall list cleanup. This game is not relevant, and it's been out for a whole year. I'm not really buying video games. If anything, there is this problem now. Is this out of early access? Yes. So this is rated very positively. I'll put it on the wish list. Where there's this problem now that the Steam Deck has created, in that there are people like me who would just prefer save their money for the very expensive Steam Deck than buy video games. And I wouldn't be surprised if Valve makes more money by selling video games than they do selling the Steam Deck. I guess I'll give this more time, although I probably could just say no to it right now. And then the next game has been completely removed from Steam. But yeah, it's kind of hard to justify purchasing any video games at all when I'm not getting around to playing video games, and when I would like to get the Steam Deck OLED for like $500. Like that is one big Steam sale. Usually I was spending about $300 on games for one big Steam sale, and then almost a whole nother Steam sale. So that's basically 2 years of 2 years to 1 year of complete video game purchases just to buy the Steam Deck. Plus, you have this situation where you are always going to be uncertain about whether buying the Steam Deck OLED version now is actually the right move, or you should just wait another year and wait till a Steam Deck 2 or another revision of the Steam Deck 1 comes out. I wanted this game, Drunk Relapsed, to actually be well received, but it didn't happen. Like the idea of platforming while controlling the woozy character was somewhat comedic in my mind, although inherently co-op, I guess, is pretty much the same idea. Then here we have a space game that is mixed and not well received, so we'll remove that. Then we'll give this game more time. Now, why did the fall list cleanup run as far as the macro this time and then hasn't run for the past week? I really don't know. I know a lot of times it's the case that Steam itself has failed to allow me to load up my fall list. Maybe I should find some extra time and do a fall list cleanup and get those 4,000 plus games that are on the fall list reduced down quite a bit. I almost certainly should do that, but it's probably not worth my time. And then the new games on Steam didn't actually run, so I had to manually just go through this. And because I manually went through this, a lot of these games may be things we already looked at once we start getting further behind. And so far, I wouldn't be surprised if there's very little games worth mentioning at all. We have My Girlfriend Doesn't Know What I'm Into, which, yeah. This is a free, kind of cheap visual novel. Yeah, you know what, just for the headline, just for the YouTube short, I'm gonna give this a chance. There is definitely some weirdness there around dating, in that I think a lot of people date and then they don't really ever discuss their kinks per se, and thus they end up potentially even getting married and just being completely incompatible. It's not a first date conversation, more than likely, that you should be discussing kinks, although depending on if you're like dating on a website, checking different boxes makes sense. There's a website that has like a whole form of compatibilities as far as kinks, that you just say you have both people fill out the websites, and then it compares the two people and spits out what the two people have really in common. But yeah, it's a lot like having a personal account on Pornhub or something, where that's the Rick and Morty joke, is why would you have an account on Pornhub? And he was like, oh, it's so you can match up with other people and see if you're compatible. And yeah, that's an interesting idea. Anyways, I'm looking at an adult game called Tamara in the Forsaken Dungeon. It's 3D CGI ladies. There's one red-headed elf lady and one purple-haired humanoid-looking lady. So girl on girl. One of the screenshots here is literally yarn play. peeing, so that's quite a fetish. And in the background's a little rough. It looks like it's just an asset flip dungeon. Or castle. Not dungeon, castle. It says it has a puzzle game in it, but none of the screenshots are really showing that. Tomorrow in the Forsaken Dungeon is $2.99 in English for interface and subtitles. I wouldn't be surprised if there's very little here as a game. That is also one of the other things I've been wasting time with. Is there's this BBC show that I was able to watch on Amazon Prime Video called Pure, about a lady that has OCD, intrusive thoughts of an adult nature, and because it's a BBC show, that gave them an excuse to have a lot of naked, admittedly old and ugly people shown on the show. But it doesn't, like a lot of BBC series, which you can barely even call them series, it doesn't really end anywhere, and I imagine the book Pure probably has a better way to wrap up something. And if anything, it's probably a narrative showing that regardless of whether the lady has OCD and has all these intrusive thoughts, her coping mechanisms and actions, and her just general actions as a human being, are really bad, and she's effectively just ruining her life and making it worse on herself. One thing definitely they don't cover is that there's several occasions where she is clearly drinking to excess in an attempt to drown out the obsessive thoughts in her brain, which almost certainly wouldn't work because it's going to only lower your inhibitions and cause you to act on those intrusive thoughts more, which she acts on the intrusive thoughts quite a bit. But they don't even address that for her condition, alcohol use is almost certainly a no-go zone, and she probably should be on some kind of anxiety medicine that would also necessitate her not drinking alcohol. But she's kind of not a likable character either. Let's see, am I going to do anything with scroll survival? No. Yeah. There's a real danger in diagnosing, or wives diagnosing their husbands as having sexual addictions and things like that, OCD, intrusive thoughts. But yeah, there is a big difference, certainly, from having a different level of libido, which a lot of times males do feel that they have a much higher libido than females do, and having OCD, obsessive intrusive thoughts, which is often not anywhere close to what you normally think of OCD, where people are just compulsively cleaning as a coping mechanism. And yeah, a therapist really is the only one who would even be close to being qualified to actually diagnose you with having OCD, intrusive thoughts. The intrusive part is a big factor there too. Like, it would have to be constant or very, very frequent intrusive thoughts. Everybody has intrusive thoughts every now and then, but like, if you're just 24 hours a day, 7 days a week thinking about something, that's when you get to the level of a disorder. Even if it were true that men were thinking about sex every 7 seconds, which they aren't, that's still not really high enough to be a disorder. It's when thoughts are coming to your head that you had no idea that you would have even wanted or entertained. And a lot of it really has to do with also just whether you're being anxious around the thoughts or not. Like, if you're having a thought and going, okay, well, that's a thought, moving on with my life, then you're not anxious about it. But if you're having thoughts about doing something and you are anxious about that really may be the only coping mechanism that a lot of therapists can give you, is to say these thoughts are always going to come to you, but you're just going to have to deal with them. Like, very few therapists I think would ever make the argument, and this has nothing to do with video games anyways, very few therapists though would make the argument that thoughts are bad or that they're going to help you get rid of thoughts. That's just not how the human brain works. You're going to have thoughts regardless, and you either dismiss them or you act on them, and in a lot of cases you don't act on them. Anyways, back to video games. We have another adult game here called Oh Yeah, which is a matching tile game, but I'm not sure exactly how it works. It kind of feels like you've got these little blue silhouettes for guys and pink silhouettes for girls, and they're in different orientations, I guess, and so you're having to kind of play something almost like 2048 with blue and pink silhouettes, which feels a little confusing. And then it looks like there's at least 4 2D anime ladies that you're getting some level of undress of, I imagine, as you continue the match. It feels like a real game, unlike most adult games. It's selling for 79 cents. It says it has English with full audio interface and subtitles. The description here of how the game plays is a big wall of text. Interesting. It could have been a mobile game at some point, but maybe not. I'm going to put Oh Yeah on the fault list just to see if it's well received. In particular, it definitely is at the right price point at 79 cents, where I could see getting the game, playing it for just a couple hours, and being satisfied with that. Moving on. My middle mouse click is still not working, but I also haven't changed the settings, so it's no surprise it's doing the exact same thing it was already programmed to do. One thing I am noticing about Firefox, and in particular when running macros, is that Firefox does just sometimes feel like it needs to be fully rebooted to work. Like, I don't know why that's the case, but yeah. I definitely did not have to reset Chrome as much as I have to reset Firefox every now and then. But it's not really a big deal. This game was already on the fault list, so we can take it off. There's likely going to be a increased push of developers, of users coming to Firefox away from Chrome, as Chrome in particular is tightening the controls on how many different matching rules you can use to block. So it's going to limit uBlock origin down to considerably fewer blocks and matches it can use, which, yeah, while that might not actually change too much, it sounds nefarious and sounds contrived as an excuse to allow YouTube ads to still play, which is their main focus, I'm sure. Although Google may very much ads on just Google search to be viewable too, to not be blocked. They also are seemingly experimenting with slowing down YouTube videos on Firefox, which, yeah, that'll almost certainly end up in an antitrust lawsuit. Zombie Killing Simulator here is already mixed, so I'm not going to bother to put that on the list. Yeah, if I just really focus, I think we'll probably burn through all these games fairly quickly. We'll give this a chance. We won't give this a chance. That's nothing. Although it is already a very small number of a smaller number of games being released that I can feel, there's still room for improvement on this. We still are seeing 20 to 1, I would say, roughly speaking, bad games, irrelevant games, to the one game that even has a slight chance of being worthwhile or high enough quality to justify, in my mind, that it should be on the Steam storefront. The question, I suppose, is how can you improve quality here? At a certain level, I almost would argue that they should go back to the idea of Steam Direct games and having to get a certain level of people to vote in a game to be on Steam. Of course, that wouldn't make as much money for Valve, so they'd never do that. But then, addressing that, if they just raised the Steam Direct price, it's been long enough. If they doubled it to $200, that would be fine, I'm sure. Although they might be keeping it at $100 to compete with other storefronts publishing fees and not come off like they're being a monopolist. Should I make YouTube shorts around these games? I have a ton of YouTube shorts, and I really just am gonna have to schedule a whole bunch of them and catch up. I'll give it a chance. Should I make YouTube shorts on Mahjong Solitaire games? No, they're too similar. Either you know one exists or you don't. This one doesn't look quite visually polished enough. We have another adult game here called Hentai Melina, which is a square jigsaw puzzle game, and frankly, we may have already talked about it. It's 69 cents. It says it supports 30 languages in the interfaces only. Yep. And see, we're already back to November 25th. So very quickly, I should start to recognize these games and say, I've already seen these, and that the rest of them are going, we've already looked at. But so far, that's not the case, and we're at November 24th now, which that doesn't really make a lot of sense. This next adult game is called Metal Breaker, which is a 2D side-scrolling, very much Western style animated character. You have this Lara Croft, Indiana Jones looking lady. It seems like a lot of times she is being attacked by the stereotypical natives with the giant face masks, and then sometimes she's being attacked by aliens. She or other girls are. Now, in fairness, I would say the natives that they're being depicted does have white skin, so it's not coming off as incredibly racist, although maybe it's a little racist to have what would traditionally be the stereotypical African in the giant face masks being depicted with white skin. There's a lot of screenshots here with a lot of different backgrounds. It's not super high quality in the animation, but it's an interesting thought because this is a side-scrolling shooter game, and you just don't get a lot of that as far as adult games. I think the lady, and thus the name Metal Breaker, is supposed to be somewhat dressed up like Metal Gear Solid's characters, but in general she just has a green skirt and a black bra and looks somewhat militaristic. That is, in the times that she isn't fully nude. I assume she takes some battle damage and loses clothing because of that. Metal Breaker, which could easily be misread as Mental Breaker, but no, it says Metal, has English, Japanese, and Chinese for the interface and subtitles. It's selling for $4.79. And while the animation feels very much from the case of a Western animator, it doesn't look terrible. And it definitely is a different type of adult game, which we're always looking for. That in general is just better and different types of adult games, things that aren't just cheap slide puzzles and or cheap visual novels with no decisions happening. Kinetic visual novels is what that's called, where you have no branching paths or decisions. I Am a Fish Online doesn't look like something I really want to engage with. It's perhaps just not polished quite enough. It's a difficult sale in general to make an MMORPG where you're playing as a fish. I just don't think that's quite there. Coffee Breaks, I'm fairly certain, is one of the last games we looked at last Friday. Max Twist doesn't look like anything. Retro Commander doesn't look like anything. Pixie Poxy. What concerns me, though, of course, when I start to look at older games that I should have already looked at, is that there's perhaps a higher than zero chance that I didn't look at all the old games. And there's really no way to fix that or address that, though. However, yeah, we're pretty much done today, and I only have like 3 games that I'm gonna make YouTube shorts on, and maybe 2 games that I put on the fall list that were adult games. Like, see, this Wacky Escape game feels like a game I just didn't look at when I should have. Why, a very scary Backrooms game I almost certainly looked at. And Shell's Kitchen, I definitely looked at. And then we have an adult game here we already talked about called Climax Heroines, which didn't make it to the fall list because it wasn't quite good enough. An Evil Diary. we looked at. This Protean Forest we already looked at. This is again the game that has an art style somewhat similar to Memento Mori. I'm still trying to figure out what this inky black background style would be best called. I wouldn't be surprised if it is inspired in part by a art style that Japanese artists did on like rice paper back in the day, and during a time in which inky black colors were one of the few colors you could use. But I don't know what the name of that art style would be called, if there is such a thing. So, yeah. There's basically two games that we saw just looking at the new games that came out on Steam. And then there was 4 games that Gamatsu had to talk about as far as new games. Which, yeah, it's really not a lot. Not a lot happening on this Cyber Monday. No surprise there. I've got just a few more hours, hopefully, to do my last bit of Cyber Monday shopping, which honestly I didn't buy that much anyways. I would have bought fairly almost nothing if I wasn't buying components to start a business and make a Smart on Air sign product and sell it. But yeah, part of that certainly comes down to the fact that Prime Day happened just a couple months ago, and so buying both on Prime Day and Black Friday and Cyber Monday makes no sense at all. You're just spending way too much money, and the same things are probably on sale. Anyways, that's going to be it for this stream. As always, I ask you to like, share, subscribe, comment, and watch every second of my videos. If you want to support me further, there's some links down below. Thank you for watching. Have a good evening.